going on some of the nuts and bolts. So welcome everyone to the task force meeting. We're delighted to see folks. We do have a few people who are out with COVID and various things, but we are delighted to see everyone who is here. And just as a reminder to folks, we really like conversation to occur because not everyone can see the chat. And so if you have questions that are more technical in nature, go ahead and put them in chat as we go through things. But if it's for discussion, we just encourage you to bring it back to the group so everyone has a chance to contribute and understand what all we're thinking. You know, we continue to have this problem that a couple of you continue to sign in as Yvonne Miranda, and while we all might want to be Yvonne, she is happy to help you, give some directions on how to sign in with your name down at the bottom if you need some help with that. Anybody who wants to fix Zoom without them releasing a whole new set of things, we'd be happy to have that help. But I think at this point, let's go ahead and get started. Just as a reminder, Yvonne and I are here with you. I'm Roxanne White. I'm go by Rox from your facilitating team. Sabrina is out on some well-earned R&R right now. And let's go ahead and go into introductions. And Yvonne, what do you want us to talk about today?
Welcome, everyone. I believe last time we discussed things that we planned on doing this summer. So let's follow up and see what fun things you have done. And if you haven't done the things that you said, what have you been doing instead? I'll go first. Yvonne Miranda, Strategy with Rox, part of your consulting team here today. My goal this summer was to do a lot of hiking. I have done 0 of that, but I have been dancing a lot. So I will go ahead and pass it over to Flor Alvidrez and Geraldine.
Hello, everyone. Flor Alvidrez, and I don't remember what I said I was gonna do, but I will say that I did go hiking. I will go hiking, and I did get to go hiking with my son. We went to St. Mary's Glacier, and he did not want to leave. He loved it so much.
That's great. Is Geraldine with us? Erin Clark. Oh, Geraldine, I see you there. Do you want to tell us one fun thing you've done this summer? And I have you on mute.
Okay. Gosh, let me see. I guess planning for a surprise birthday party for my son's 50th birthday. And I had surgery, so I really couldn't go anywhere fun. So that's the best I could think of right now.
That's great. That sounds like fun. Planning parties is always fun.
Yes.
All right, we'll move on to, is Anna DeWitt with us or Alfonso Espinoso?
Not yet.
No, Jean Fashar, Stacy Gilmore. Where is my task force today?
I think they're coming late. Steve's here.
So it's Steve Harley.
I couldn't make it to last month's meeting because I was helping run an election, but and I don't really have a whole lot of goals for the summer, but one thing I did yesterday, which was great, was went up to the tundra in Rocky Mountain National Park, and I love botanizing, looking at flowers closely, and there are a whole lot of them up there right now if you go up above tree lines. So I recommend it to everyone.
Thank you. Kate Hilberg, I'll have you go next. Just as a reminder, welcome everybody. We are introducing ourselves by name and saying one fun thing we've done this summer. So Kate Hilberg, followed by Brittany Catalinas.
Kate Hilberg. One fun thing that I've done this summer is go to my son's restaurant where my son is currently a chef, and had a really nice evening there.
Oh, no, you have to tell us what restaurant that is so the rest of us can go too.
It's Luca.
Ooh, we like that place.
Me too.
All right, it looks like Brittany is not yet with us. So I'll go ahead and go to Joel Noble, followed by Bruce O'Donnell.
Hi, Joel Noble, and one of the things I've been doing more of this summer is what I hope to do, which is biking more. I just biked over to West Denver today for a little tea with friends and biked back before time for work. So beat the heat and saved on Uber.
I love it. Bruce?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Bruce O'Donnell. And a fun thing this summer is I got to attend a nephew's wedding. And so I guess I'm at an age where all my friends' kids are starting to get married. So a lot of fun to see all the joy and happiness of the young people.
Thank you. Caitlin Quander, followed by Lou Raiders.
Hi, we did a long weekend over Father's Day up in Estes Park, so kind of like you, Steve, and spent a day in Lyons and then up in Estes for a couple of days. So got some really great hikes with our kids and went out on the lake. And I have to pitch in Lyons, there is this beautiful new park they've built along the river. After all of the flooding, with the federal funding, they couldn't build houses there, so they built this amazing park for the town, and there's like water features and a playground, and our kids could have stayed there the whole time instead of Rocky Mountain National. So you should check it out. And then I was going to say to Kate, if your son is the chef at Luca, you have to share the secret recipe for the like truffle. There's a pasta dish that is the truffle that is beyond. So see if you can get that for the group.
I'll try my best.
Lou Raiders.
So we have been trying to get out and explore some of the state parks, and we went up to Boyd State Park and I bought a blow up paddleboard. So I am not proficient in that, but I have become very proficient at doing a face plant in water off of my paddleboard. Lot to learn.
Thank you for sharing. Councilwoman Sandoval, followed by Robin Wood Mason.
Hi, everyone. I was able to go to Palisade for 3 days, and I did a stand-up paddleboard down the Colorado River, and then I was able to go to some wineries, and it was gorgeous, just what I needed.
Great. Robin Wood Mason.
Hey everyone, glad to be back in the mix. Robin Wood Mason here, and guess I haven't really done much that I would say is fun so far this summer, but I did start a new job in June. And so that's kept me very busy and very excited. So
Congrats.
thanks.
Lindsay Miller. We'll circle back to you.
Hello, Lindsay Miller. I think the most fun thing I did this summer was go to San Diego with my husband, which is where we got married last October. So we returned to the scene and had a great time.
Thank you. And Naomi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi there. Sorry, a little bit of a delay. Hi, I'm Naomi Grenitz. I'm an aide for Councilman Sandoval, staffing her on this committee today. And I just had a nice small moment. Last week, I went to a new-ish beer garden in Edgewater, and it was just one of those absolutely idyllic, warm summer evenings, lots of dogs and babies, and just a really wonderful summer moment.
Great. I think we have all of our task force members. I'll go ahead and pass it on over to Liz Weigel, who will introduce the CPD team.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I'm Liz Weigel, and I'm the rezoning planning supervisor, and kind of sitting in as the project manager until Brandon comes fully on board. My fun is just starting with all of my family and nieces and nephews all arriving and taking over my house for the month of August. So I'm definitely hiding out at the office. But what I've done so far, I did get to take a long weekend over 4th of July and go to Steamboat Springs, which was really nice with my family, and went to the rodeo, which I had never been to a rodeo before. And that was definitely an interesting adventure. I'll throw it to Rob.
Thanks, Liz. So again, my name is Rob Haig. I'm a member of the project team with CPD Planning Services. And I guess fun things I've been doing this summer, I've been trying to I do a lot of backpacking and fly fishing at those high alpine lakes. I've been trying not to do any repeat trips. So nothing I've done in the entire time that I've been out in Colorado. And I've been successful so far. So that's been really fun to explore. And with that, I will pass it off to Brandon.
Thanks, Rob. Good to see everyone again. I'm Brandon Shaver with CPD, also a member of the project team. As you remember, last time I really wanted to get up to Glenwood Adventure Park to ride their new roller coaster. I have not yet done that, but my dad did just turn 75 last weekend, so it was a lot of fun having him over for a little backyard barbecue. And let's see, who else do we have here that's on our team? I think I'll pass it to... Is that it?
You got
I
everybody.
think that's all of you.
Yep.
But we did have our other council member join us as well. Whoop. So Councilwoman Gilmore, I was like, look for you, and I was like, wait a minute, I lost you. There you are again. Sorry about that. And we know that we've got at least one other person who's trying to join right now. But Councilwoman Gilmore, the question is, what did you think you were going to do this summer, and what are you actually doing for fun? Not just, getting more work to do, as our council members have on this call. Both of you, congratulations.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. And, what I thought I was going to be doing this summer, I fulfilled. I finished out really strong my second term as council president on the 18th of July. And so had been council president from July of 2020, all the way up until the 18th of July, and was honored to finish that out strong and support Council President Torres and our new Council Pro Tem Sandoval in their election. And so happy to do that. But what I'm actually preparing to do is my youngest daughter graduated from high school in May, and we are taking her out to Boston. She's going to be attending Emmanuel College in Boston. And so we're going to take that trip the end of August. And my youngest daughter is going to be going off to college. So just trying to process that and take a little bit of time to spend with her, because it's definitely a sacrifice, and feel like I haven't spent as much time as I would have liked to. So trying to cram that all into a very short time frame. So thank you for everybody being here today, and look forward to the meeting.
Great. And we are also very fortunate that we have Councilwoman Sita Baca and one of her team members who is also with us today. So thank you, everyone, for your interest in this important topic. And just as a reminder, as we go through this again, for folks who signed on after I'd said this, we really like to, we have some folks who are sight impaired and some folks who can't see the chat because of other technology issues. So if you have technical questions, we love to have those in chat. But for other things, if you can keep bringing them back to the group, we'd like to be able to have everyone be able to hear the conversations and participate that way. And Liz, talk to us about what we're doing in today's meeting and the follow-up from the last meeting. I think you're going to share some slides with us, which everyone should have received in advance as well. So Liz, thanks for getting those out early to everyone. And also let's walk through them. Looks like Liz is working on her.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to see if I can. I'm in the office and I only have one screen, so I'm having a little. I'm used to my dual screen, so it's making my life a little complicated. And I'm trying to see if I can. I might wind up asking Rob if he can share. If you have it in presentation mode, that might be easier, because it's not agreeing with me that way.
I can, yeah. I was
Rob,
about to.
while you get that up, let's talk about a couple of things that we know are coming up. One is that, we had a little bit of a hitch with losing staff members and gaining staff members. Brandon, we are delighted that you are transitioning into this role. You're still in that transition process. But as we do that, we are going to need a couple of additional meetings that hopefully we can get from you all. So what we'd like to do is have an additional meeting on September the 14th and an additional meeting on December the 14th. So Yvonne's going to put those into chat for you. She already did. And at the end of the meeting, we're going to come back and check to make certain we don't have a lot of conflicts for those 2 days. So that gives you time during the meeting to check on those, that sort of thing. So Rob, are you ready to go share screen?
Yes, is it not shared right now? Can you not see it
It
full
is
screen?
not.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. Where did it go? How about now?
Yes.
We got it. Thank you so much, Rob.
So let's go to the next screen slide, Rob, so that everybody can see the adjustments that have happened to the schedule and why we're asking about additional meetings.
Sure.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Rob. And, as Rox mentioned, and as we talked about at our last meeting, with when Sarah, of course, left the city, we were fortunate to be able to bring Brandon on, who has a lot of experience working on rezonings on our team, but it does take some transition for him to come on board and kind of move his other projects off his plate. So that is adding a little bit of time to our schedule here. If you see, we are in the evaluating alternatives phase. So we've talked a lot about the issues, and now we're diving in to what the potential solutions are. And we're taking those topic by topic, but we will kind of bring those all together and talk about what might be the best solutions that are rising to the top to address the issues we've identified. And then we see that we move into, in the fall, what we are calling that a preferred approach, but that's really what's the package of improvements that we are suggesting after we've kind of looked at all of them together and evaluated them. We'll talk through that, and we'll obviously be talking with the public about that as well. And then we sort of developed the more formalized version of those. What does our zoning text look like? And that is bringing us into what we hoped would be kind of wrapping up in winter. We anticipate extending some into the spring to get to that adoption. And that's where Rox mentioned that we think we will need a couple of extra meetings. We're hoping, I know we talked to you about your commitment early on, so we're hoping that this will work for all of you, and we wanted to get your feedback on that at the end of the meeting. One, in adding a September meeting that might give us more opportunity to talk through the alternatives and the various topics, and then one in December that helps us kind of come to some conclusion around the preferred approach. So we'll save some time at the end of the meeting where we can chat about that, and hopefully then move forward with at least getting those on your calendar for now.
I want to clarify that
Sure.
there, in addition to the September 14th meeting is in addition to the existing September meeting. So if that works for everyone, that would mean 2 meetings in September and just adding 1 additional in December.
And we think that helps get us caught up, folks. So we'd just be grateful for that. And we did try to avoid all of the holidays. So it's before Hanukkah, it's after Thanksgiving in the December meeting. So tried to look for keeping it on Wednesdays, but also avoiding the really super busy times for everyone. Okay, so
And I
let's
think
go ahead.
sorry, Rox, I think we'll clarify at the end, but we'd assume this would be still in the 3 to 5 p.m. timeframe. So that same timeframe that we've been using. If you do have a conflict in the evening, hopefully that doesn't cause an issue. Okay.
Great, let's go on to the next slide then, Rob. And just want to recap where we're going at today's meeting. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about the CBD staff has been doing follow-up from our last meeting on the things that you requested. And we are moving into today when public input is submitted. So if you remember last time, we spent a lot of time on the how. Who got noticing? Why did they get noticing? When did they get noticing? Who didn't get noticing? That sort of thing. So today we're moving into this next piece of when is public input submitted? How is it submitted? So, taking and building on all of those great recommendations from last time about making certain we get the right people in the meetings, which we talked a lot about at the last time, and that if you're impacted, you know about it. This time is about, what happens when that public input is considered. And just for background, if you remember, we've had some dialogue, and we're going to delve into this today. Are there should there be different processes for different kinds, big zonings, little zonings, areas that have been identified already at high risk of displacement? Should we be thinking about those communities differently as we work to ensure that we have a more equitable response? Engaging in the public scenario discussion. So you all asked last time, and so it'd be helpful to actually have some examples. And we had, where did Bruce go? Bruce even offered to bring some of his examples forward. We didn't go that route, but we, because he's in and out of this meeting today, Bruce, and we know that. But we did start to bring some of that forward for some examples that some of you all may know quite well happening in communities, and then identifying areas of opportunity and really getting your feedback today about, so what do you think we should do and how should we do it? Are there, should we treat everything the same, or should there be differences? So let's move on to the next slide. And in other follow-up from the last meeting, you really asked for us to think about evaluating alternatives for the public awareness, the hows, the whens, the whos, identifying case studies, reviewing best practices. And you all suggested that we really look at two examples for different reasons, Lakewood and Aurora, and the city staff are in the process of doing that. So we didn't forget about that. We just need a little more time on that to come back around, because we really want to have a chance to see if they were doing those changes for equity, and if so, did it have the intended impact? Oftentimes we do things that turn out to not have the impact we want and create the change for communities that we want to create. And so are we really getting the results that they hoped for? So that work is underway. Liz or Brandon, anybody want to say anything more about that? Brandon, as you're trying to get caught up and assigned over here as quickly as you can, Liz?
Sure, I would just jump in that I really appreciated the conversation last time, and lots of great ideas came out of that. And we are in the midst of evaluating some of these. And I think there is the opportunity at future meetings to bring back case studies or these examples from the peer cities. And particularly as we get Brandon on board, we'll have more capacity on our end to kind of build that into future meetings.
Great. So on that note, Rob, take us through some of these details. As usual, we know there's different levels of understanding of the current process. So Rob's going to remind us of what currently happens, how that process works, and then we'll have a little bit of time for just questions about that. And then we're going to move into two different examples to talk through what's actually happened with public meetings and public input. So Rob.
Thank you, Rox. Yeah, so this will be similar to how we looked at our kind of last topic discussion, right, which was public awareness. So today we're going to jump into the next piece, which is kind of the next kind of step in the rezoning process. Once everyone has been notified, then how are they able to get those comments to staff and the decision makers, and what's done with that. So what is public input? So public input includes all the ways that comments are submitted, engagement is conducted, and how that feedback and those comments are incorporated into the review, and how they affect the decision-making process. So in the last phase of this project, we also began to identify the issues that we're trying to solve for. And so while we look at this new discussion topic, we want to continue to tie back this conversation to our draft issues for the project. So the identified draft issues that relate to public input, there are three of them. The first is that public engagement requirements for rezonings are insufficient or unclear, that the role of public input in the decision-making process for rezonings is unclear, and that the timing and format of public hearings for rezonings are inequitable and inaccessible for some stakeholders. So throughout the last conversations, we have also heard a lot of feedback related to public input. And we just wanted to kind of make it really clear that we have been hearing this, we have been collecting it, and we're already using it and kind of shaping how we're going to start looking at things. Some of this feedback that we've already heard includes considering requirements for community engagement tailored to the type and specific location of the rezonings, to consider neighborhood community meetings in addition to meetings with RNOs, to prioritize engagement of and input from underrepresented groups, to provide clear engagement requirements for the applicants, and clarify how to submit feedback for a rezoning proposal, to clarify and improve how public input influences the review and decision-making process, to improve the community's understanding of how public input is considered, and to improve the flexibility and opportunities to provide public input prior to and during the public hearings. So that's kind of what we've already heard at this point. Looking forward to kind of bringing some of that back into the fold. So if you recognize some of these as your comments or your feedback, please feel free to bring them back up when we get back into discussion at a later point in this meeting.
And Rob, let me just remind the group, if they don't remember some of those comments, it also came from our various focus groups and from the community input meeting that many of you were able to attend as well. So we've really been going out with that accordion and coming back and forth. So
thanks, Rox. That's a great reminder. Yeah. So if you see anything there that you don't recognize, but you think is interesting, yeah, again, please bring that back up. Okay, so to frame our discussion today about public input, we want to break down the rezoning process into 3 phases so we can kind of more cleanly think about this. So if you attended or have watched that task force orientation meeting that we did at the beginning of this project, you may recognize the steps on the left. This is just taken straight from that slide presentation. We found that these steps can be broken down into 3 phases. The first is the pre-application phase, second is the application review phase, and then the public hearing phase. So this first pre-application phase, so what is this? This is the first phase of what we consider in the rezoning process. This begins when the applicant submits a pre-application review request form. It includes the pre-application review meeting with staff, and it continues all the way through the informal public outreach phase and anything else that takes place prior to the formal application being submitted. So the primary public input during this phase is what we do call the informal public outreach phase. This is any engagement and outreach that is done by the applicant prior to the submittal of the application. So it can happen prior to the meeting with staff, it can happen after the meeting with staff, but it's done by the applicant. And it's done in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it includes placing flyers or just knocking on neighbors' doors if it's a smaller rezoning, like that would only allow an ADU, so a small change. And for some cases that have a more significant change in the zone district, it might change more form, standards, or uses, there's more significant community outreach that's done, sometimes holding and hosting community meetings, sometimes meeting on site with community members. We see this whole range of types of outreach done by applicants in our current process. And while it's not formally required as part of the complete application, the documentation of this outreach is requested as an attachment and part of the rezoning application. And that does take many forms also. So in the next phase is what we call the application review phase. So this phase begins at the submittal of the formal rezoning application. This includes the review of the application and its narrative and all of its attachments by community planning and development staff, other city agencies. And this is also where we send out notification to surrounding property owners and through all of our other notification methods that we've talked about in previous discussions. And we solicit and receive that feedback and incorporate that into our review. Any questions or public comment are directed to the rezoning case manager, and RNOs are encouraged to submit a position statement. And any and all written comments that are received during this period are attached to the staff report that then will go forward to planning board and city council. And these are also forwarded to the applicant for their consideration as well. So the final phase of the 3 here is the public hearing phase. So this phase includes the planning board public hearing, the land use, transportation, and infrastructure committee meeting, and the city council public hearing. During this phase, notifications are posted prior to each of the public hearings. And any new written comments are again attached to the staff report and forwarded to the board and council for their consideration. And members of the public are then invited to attend and comment on the rezoning application during the planning board and city council public hearings. So throughout all of these phases in the rezoning process, it's really important to remember the review criteria in the Denver zoning code. So these are the 5 criteria that staff, planning board, and city council all use to evaluate any rezoning request. And so any public comments received are considered as they relate to these criteria.
So Rob, can you stop? Just let's give people a chance to really look at these for a couple of minutes, because these become very important, because at various points, and I wish Monica were with us today, folks like, and Myra, folks like them have pointed to it several times, what about the other priorities of the city? So whether it's a priority from on affordable housing, or if it's a priority for food deserts, what about other priorities? So how would you think about those? Because I know that's come up for a number of cases. How does that come into these 5 criteria?
I'm going to take that, Rob.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Okay. So, and we will have a future meeting devoted to talking about the criteria. So I know that's like a front of mind for many people, and we will get there. But right now, this is the current process. These are the 5 criteria that are used, and these are our broad categories. We've talked about this sometimes, like some of them are not very clear in terms of what does that really mean in terms of evaluating them. But really, what we do is we look at the comments, and this is, staff makes a recommendation, planning board makes a recommendation, and city council ultimately votes on the application. And we're looking at how does those comments relate to the adopted plans that we have, or these other criteria. So there's maybe a comment that is about what does our blueprint plan say, and there's a comment of whether they feel that the commenter feels that the application meets that guidance or not. And that certainly is something that we would look at and influence potentially the recommendation and the vote of whether that whether it is consistent with our adopted plans. And those are broad plans, and they have lots of recommendations in them. So there's often many factors to think about as we see comments come in and issues be elevated. Something that does become a challenge sometimes, it might be about a particular part of a project. So say, I don't like the design of the building that I've seen that's coming forward. And that one is a harder comment for us to consider, because what is being evaluated is a zone district, which allows a wide variety of buildings and uses and things that can come from the building. So that can be a challenge, frustrating, particularly for community members when they want to talk about the very particular project, or maybe they might be concerned about an aspect of that, and that really is not part of the consideration for these 5 criteria and for the zone district. So that's just some examples of the types of things that come up in terms of comments, and always having to go back and say, okay, how does this relate to these 5 criteria that we have to consider for the application?
Great. Thanks, Liz, and thanks for reminding us that we have a meeting upcoming that will be about these 5 criteria. And we know that people have been anxious to get to each of these various aspects. So before we go into some scenarios, let's stop for a minute and see, in terms of this piece of how the noticing is done for the public hearings and the public hearings themselves, what thoughts or questions do folks have about that? Everybody had a chance at one point or another in your life to attend one of these public meetings? Joel.
Yeah, I know I'll be repeating myself from previous meetings, but one of the last points on a previous slide was about the time that meetings are held. And there is no right time for everybody. And that's unfortunate, but we could absolutely do more to let people participate. The pandemic, as with this meeting and many other meetings, has been great because it pushed us all to do virtual meetings, but that doesn't mean that people can still attend live. So we should take the best ideas that other cities have had for being able to have high quality participation that gets confirmation that the entity making the decision heard the input, even if you're not participating live, so you can participate when it is convenient for you. And thank you for making a note about Lakewood. I think they have some ideas we could learn from.
Great. And Rob, can you take the slides down for us for a second or go back to the prior slide? Actually, let's go back to the slide before this real quick. Actually, fine, you're fine taking it down. We'll go to Steve, Caitlin, and Lou next. Steve?
Hi, folks. I was just reflecting on the informal stage and the formal stage from an R&O perspective. And the most recent one that we went through was rezoning from industrial to industrial mixed use for a whole city block. And we gave some really detailed feedback to the city on that regarding how it was going to impact neighbors. And it's kind of a complex situation because it's not right in a residential area. So it's not displacing people or something like that, but it was impacting some of our future plans that have benefits to our neighborhood. For instance, a potential bikeway that might cross the exact area that was being rezoned. So what had occurred to me from getting this refresher on the process was that we never heard back from the city in any way addressing those points. And also the developer happened to not, we had some further contact with them, but they pretty much brushed off those concerns. So it would be great if there was a little more attention on, especially when we put some effort into written feedback on us. This is during an LDR, which is not what every rezoning goes through, but it would be great if we had maybe some of those major points bounce back at us, like, for instance, yes, we're considering that, and or asking if something's unclear, or because it kind of felt like it was a waste of time. That's my point, because they didn't make any adjustments based on our feedback. It didn't seem. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
And Steve, can I just clarify? Are you speaking from the purpose of the R&O didn't get any feedback?
That's correct. The R&O gave some detailed feedback. I kind of shepherded the process on that one, and it was fairly clear that some conflicts could arise from this rezoning, from the development of that area, and we maybe we got a little bit of what we wanted, but we in some very narrow areas. But on the whole, it felt like nothing really got through, is the feeling we got, because of the lack of addressing some key points, that how it related to existing plans, for instance.
Great. So it's great. In addition to clarification, it sounds like we're already getting some recommendations, both from Joel about really considering keeping the remote option and time of day, and from you about making certain we do feedback to groups and doing that sort of thing. So that's great. We'll capture those as well as part of recommendations, as well as clarity. Lou, and then, Caitlin, and then Lou.
Actually, Joel really covered the bulk of what I was going to say. I think the other thing to think about is, are there opportunities rather than an email or, but to kind of link and be able to provide comments more electronically in advance of hearings if they're not able to attend planning board or city council themselves. That it's kind of a simpler path. If they go to find out about the rezoning and are on that page, is there a way to provide feedback right there?
Great. And Caitlin, as we get into one of our scenarios today, I think it'd be great for us to reflect on that recommendation and seeing if it would have helped solve one of the challenges that people refer to. So we'll capture it now, but also let's think about that when we get to our second scenario. Lou, and then we will go to the scenarios. So Lou?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in because this goes with what Joel was saying and Caitlin was thinking. As the head of Cherry Creek North Neighborhood Association and also our zoning committee for many years, it's very difficult to get people involved and to really know that you're reaching people. And I know that the city is continuing its efforts to try to strengthen the R&O process or to help R&Os or think beyond R&Os. But one of the things that we've talked about earlier in our meetings was the possibility of having project specific websites that are up that we could then link. And one thing that I have done recently, and which is shocking because I no longer have a big IT team to help me, but I started a YouTube channel for our R&O, which is relatively easy. And then most people now want an opportunity to Zoom in, even if it's a hybrid, which I haven't figured out yet. But then you can record those and put them up on your YouTube channel. Then if there's a presentation by a developer to the R&O, all you have to do is tell people, here's where you go to see it. And I think that in some of the discussions about how to improve the process for R&Os and for developers, we could definitely help and assist official R&Os to be able to have those platforms. And like Steve was saying, if you do go to all the trouble to provide the comments, that can be uploaded as well, explaining what the comments are, and then giving an email address for people to add their comments. And again, I think that it's difficult to reach people because people are busy. So you have to meet them when they can participate. And if that's 5 in the morning when Joel's on his bike to go out and have coffee on the west side of town, or if it's, you know, midnight or lunchtime, it's just that people can't and don't, in my opinion, participate enough. And then they act surprised, and maybe the surprise is that we just don't give them enough opportunity. So there are so many things that we can do now that most of us are, you know, Zoom literate, that we just need to reach more people in the areas where the rezonings take place. Thanks.
Great. So continuing this theme of more opportunities, different ways to have input and participate. And then Rob, this is your heads up. We're going to have Councilwoman Sitabaka, and then we're going to go back to the slides. And Councilwoman Sitabaka has also put a resource in the chat for us. And as you know, we'll send those out with the notes and have a chance after the meeting to also read it and go through it. But Councilwoman.
Thank you. And I know I'm not a voting member, and I am sitting in for a member of our community, Alfonso. But I did want to bring up that I agree that there's got to be some more written ways for folks to participate, but written and quantifiable. And so the resource that I put it in the chat are equitable development scorecards that are used in other places. The one I've attached is used by Twin Cities. And I think that's an important way to capture written feedback from communities, because there's also a way to weight the voices that you're hearing from. And I think that's really important when we do talk about equity considerations. There should be weight, heavier weight on the people's voices who live in a particular area, and especially marginalized folks. And so this gives us something that can get in front of a council member and show you in a quantifiable way, this public input is suggesting I should vote in this particular way. And then there's a whole bunch of ways we can, or we should be accommodating this on the city council side. There are tools that other cities use that connect directly to our bill tracking systems. I've talked to IT in the city about figuring out how any resident in the city could have a dashboard, not just where they pay for their compost and trash, but where they could link directly to decisions that are being made on a rezoning and input their feedback there. That way it's also attached to an address, a physical verifiable address in the city. So those are just some ideas that we've been talking about in the GES community that Alfonso wanted me to make sure you all heard. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for being here on your own behalf as well as on his behalf. And certainly as we think about the various ways of input, adding some weighted understanding so every input is not the same or about the same. So Rob, let's go ahead and go to the scenarios. And as we go through these, go ahead and go to the next one, Rob. We're going to present 2 different scenarios, and these are just meant to prompt your thinking. We're not going to go down them one by one, but you know, we're going to be talking about what we already started talking about just a few minutes ago, but really in relationship to 2 different scenarios, one that may have less impact and one that may have more impact. and I'm choosing those words very carefully because as Councilwoman Sita Baca just referenced, this piece of who's getting impacted and how heavily are they impacted has already been a big topic for us and continues to be front of mind. So what are the opportunities for public input to be improved? I love that you're already starting to think about those. When in the process is it most important for public input to be received? Who should be, or how should the public input be considered? Weighted voting being an opportunity we just heard. How should engagement vary? So, this is the one we've talked about before of if it, should we have differing approaches? Too bad Brendan and Alfonso aren't here today because both of them have talked about the need for potentially differing public input process based on, is it an area that Nest has already identified as a high risk for displacement, or one that we know we are risking displacement at? Should the engagement so vary based on the type, or furthermore on the top, an ADU versus a big apartment complex? Are they the same? Is affordable housing the same as regular housing or for-profit housing? And how can equity be advanced in each of those scenarios? So let's go ahead and go to the first scenario. Some of your ideas may apply to both, but we're going to start with a smaller one. And Yvonne, I think we do have people on camera, but let's just read through it anyway in case anybody needs us to read it through for them. I know that Claudia isn't with us today, but let's still do it so that in the recording we have it as well.
Absolutely. Scenario 1 is surrounding an ADU rezoning. Mr. A would like to rezone his property to allow for an accessory dwelling unit in his backyard, which he would like to use to generate rental income and eventually for his aging parents to move into. Mr. A has never participated in a zoning process before and is not familiar with the steps. At the pre-application meeting, planning staff recommends he do some informal outreach with neighbors before he submits an application. Mr. A goes to his local neighborhood organization meeting and talks to some of his neighbors. Some neighbors are supportive, while others do not want to see ADUs built in the neighborhood. Mr. A moves forward with the application and includes 2 letters of support. At the planning board public hearing, 10 neighbors come to speak in opposition. After questions and discussion, the planning board votes to recommend approval based on the Denver zoning code review criteria. The neighbors who participated in the hearing are frustrated because it is not clear how their comments were considered.
Okay, let's take it off the screen share, Rob, and get your thinking about this one. So some of you have talked about some recommendations earlier, and Councilwoman Sita Baca, it looks like your hand is raised, or it may be from before.
Sorry, that was from before.
No problem. We're going to have Flor and then Joel. Thoughts?
So I was just paying attention to this scenario as well as thinking of Councilwoman Sita Baca's comments. And another thing that I thought about was with the writing, there are people that may not be able to write a response or write their feelings as well. So I think that's also something that we need to think about. And when it comes to this particular situation, I'd be interested to know like the proximity of those other neighbors when we're talking about weighted voting, like if they're next door or if they're 10 blocks away. And I think that the weighted opinions are I like that idea.
Okay, so a couple things you'd like to have it be clear where people live in relationship to it and then weight it accordingly. Correct? Okay, Joel.
Right. Except I just want to make sure we also mention the non-written input.
Good point. Varying difference and our ability to take it in the language where a person may have proficiency or have less proficiency.
Exactly. Yes.
Great. Joel?
Yeah, this example, of course, speaks very closely to what we experience on planning board. One of the patterns that I've seen in the years that I've served on planning board is there's a real different participation or understanding of how planning guides zoning if a neighborhood has a neighborhood plan or if they don't. So if a neighborhood has a recent neighborhood plan, that means, people in the community through a really inclusive and typically multi-year, a 1.5 to 2 year process, have been at the table envisioning together what the future of land use and transportation and other topics should be. In cases where people have that kind of in their recent memory, and the neighbor, even if an individual didn't participate, their neighbors know, like, yeah, we got together and talked about that, 3 years ago. There's a lot less of treating public hearings as opinions. I want this or I don't want that, because that's not the criteria. The criteria is it doing the things our plans called for? So planning guide zoning, it's not a contest of I like the person who presented, or I have my personal feelings about what's next door. It's a community vision that's being enacted or voted down if at planning board and at city council if it doesn't do what the plan called for. In contrast, neighborhoods that don't have recent planning, they often treat this as a planning exercise. What do we want here? As if being asked for the first time. And that's been a huge problem. And that's one of the big things that neighborhood planning initiative should be addressing, is every neighborhood needs the benefit of people getting together and having their neighborhood plan and setting that vision. So just to clarify the difference between planning and zoning and the importance of everybody needing to be involved in planning. The second thing is just a comment. When I, as a planning board chair, see that a bunch of people have shown up for a hearing, I do try to remember to remind people of the criteria we'll be reviewing it on. Absolutely, people can say whatever is on their minds, but I do try to tee it up, and perhaps we could do more earlier in the process to tell people these are what we're listening for. This is the criteria, rather than it seeming like a vote. We got 10 people to show up opposed in this hypothetical scenario, therefore we should win, right? We should stop this thing. Well, no, our plan said this should be the zoning in the area, and the plan should be adhered to, but without somebody introducing people to how the decision will be made, the criteria by which it'll be made, it's natural for people to fall back to, well, we had more people show up than the people who disagreed with us. Thanks.
Great. So Joel, it sounds like you've got several things, knowing we still need to discuss the criteria, but that either way, the criteria really should be emphasized, and making certain that people are able to respond to the criteria, so that those of you who have to vote can then use that information. And that there's varying levels of awareness of that and knowledge about that. In addition to, we still need to review the criteria. And we also need to be really aware of neighborhood planning differs. Whether or not there's a recent plan, who all was involved in putting that plan together. So having that awareness as well. Steve, and then Councilwoman Sandoval.
I'll make this quick, but the thing that strikes me about the example is, what are the equity issues there? And to my mind, there are potentially 3 that I'm seeing immediately, and help me other task force members to see what other ones I'm missing. One is the equity issue of the ability to use this property for the benefit of a long-term resident, perhaps. Another is the communication issue of the people attending the hearing feeling like they didn't get perhaps respect, but it's also the communication that Joel was talking about, which is helping the neighbors understand what are the criteria and how does this process work. The final equity issue might be that it could create some impact on adjacent properties, or I don't see how it could create an ADU would create a big impact on a larger area, but I'm trying to figure out where this fits into the equity question, because on the whole, it seems like maybe the communication issue is the primary equity issue in this example.
Thanks, Stephen. You'll see in the next example, going deeper on exactly what you're talking about, but really wanting to be certain that we think about the use and the impact on adjacent communities. And then that communication includes respect back and that loop. So Councilwoman Sandoval, followed by Anna.
Thank you. I think Joel's comments about the last part of the paragraph is planning board votes to recommend approval based on the Denver zoning review criteria. I feel that's where the inequity lies, is because if you go to the 5, and I know I'm beating on a dead horse here, Liz, but if you go to the 5 review criteria, consistency with adopted plans, uniformity of district regulations, I don't think people even know what that means in the real world. It took me forever to figure out what that meant. Further public health, safety, and welfare, that can be interpreted anyway. If you feel like if this rezoning is hindering your public safety and health and welfare, how do you articulate that in a way that goes against adopted plans? Justifying circumstances, anything could be a justifying circumstance. It could be pro or against, and consistency with neighborhood context, zone, district, purpose, and intent. So I think that when I think about rezonings, the inequity lies within the 5 criteria. And oftentimes when, no offense to CPD on here, you give boilerplate presentations on ADUs. And so it doesn't talk about the specific neighborhoods. It doesn't talk about like what this project would do. And so it's easy to get lost on how those boilerplate presentations meet those 5 criteria, unless like you really get land use and you've studied it and you're in it to win it. But the general public, when I've had opposition in neighborhoods, they're like, I don't understand. I talked about what I felt like were justifying circumstances, and I said, it's more it's lawyerly, like lawyer language, and I don't think that's is conveyed anywhere. So I think that's where the inequity in this one lies. And so I'm glad we're going to have a whole conversation on the 5 criteria. Thank you.
And we are capturing this as well. So like earlier today, you saw the feedback we'd already received on this section. It's helpful to have the criteria and the advanced thinking on that. We'll take Anna and Jerry's comments, and then we're going to move to the next scenario. Oops, and Councilwoman Sandoval. So in that order.
Thank you. Apologies, I got on there late, but thank you for helping me get the right link. So my comment is really more maybe a question or an additional comment to Councilwoman Sita Baca's recommendation or request. And perhaps I misunderstood it, but I definitely fully support having more written options for people to participate in rezonings. I struggle myself to get to rezoning hearings as a single mom. It can be really tricky. I fear if we're giving more voice to the people who are close to the rezoning, we're being inequitable to the people who aren't able to afford a neighborhood. For example, if a rezoning is happening in Cherry Creek North or Country Club, and we're giving more voice to the people who are directly there, we're not listening to the people who serve those people in that neighborhood. We're not listening to the people who drive through that neighborhood. We're not listening to the, and by serve, I mean like teachers, nurses, firemen, police officers, et cetera. So that's just my thought of my concern with that. I'm happy to continue discussion around it. Thank you.
We think we've heard a couple of different things, weighted based on impact. And I think all of the populations you were talking about could be impacted. And so, and then weighted based on adjacency. So I think what I'm hearing in this is that if we think about weighted voting, we have to think really carefully about what does impact mean. Is adjacent might be one of them, but workforce would certainly hopefully be one of those. So there's a lot of people who may be disproportionately impacted, but thinking more deeply about that. And did we just lose Councilwoman Sita Baca? But I think that was what she meant. And she did put in the comments, written but quantifiable. You can make a scorecard that factors all of those things, and so she was thinking that. So good. Okay, Jerry, last comment from you, and then we'll go to the second scenario, which will get to a lot of the things you also are raising here. So Jerry?
Yeah, this is all really good information, and I agree with a lot of it, but I'm wondering about if there's inequity in the RNOs, because if that much, if they're placed with the responsibility of educating business owners, and I call my RNO and nobody returns my call, and I don't have any way to find out what projects are being built 2 blocks from me. I mean, so all the RNOs that are here sound wonderful, but I don't know that there's equity in all of the RNOs or this. I know our city council person has been very responsive, but we don't know who we're supposed to go to for rezoning the projects. Like somebody said, that sounded like a wonderful idea. If somebody would let us know what projects is, what's this high rise being built just 2 blocks from us, and are they going to have retail stores? But how do we find that out? I mean, we could go to permits, and that's a long process. I mean, if all the responsibility is placed on the RNOs, then I think there has to be some uniformity with all of them, because I'd like mine to be just as good as what is presented here.
Great, thank you. And in both scenarios, we do see some references to the RNOs, and we have heard throughout the RNO support and membership differs greatly by neighborhood. We've also heard from RNO leaders that they don't have some of the capacity they need, for whether it be in language capacity or outreach capacity, and that there is great inequity by neighborhood and by membership. So good thinking. So let's go to the next scenario. Rob, can you take us there? Okay, Yvonne, walk us through that one. Yvonne, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. I sounded so good to me while I was reading it. Scenario 2 is a rezoning in a neighborhood vulnerable to displacement. Development 1 has purchased a building near a light rail station. Currently, a small neighborhood serving nonprofit organization rents space in the building. The site is within a nest neighborhood, and the area is considered vulnerable for displacement according to Blueprint Denver's equity concepts. Development 1 proposes to rezone from a 2-story to an 8-story zone district in order to redevelop a property with retail and residential uses. Before applying, Development 1 reaches out to the registered neighborhood organization to share the proposed rezoning. This results in a neighborhood agreement about building design, hours of operation of business in the new building, and a letter of support for the rezoning. After submitting the application and 15 days prior to the planning board public hearing, a sign is posted on the existing building. This is the first time the tenant is made aware of the rezoning. The tenant submits a letter of concern that they will lose their lease space, but they are not able to attend the public hearing. At the public hearing, planning board recommends approval, but encourages the applicant to work with the tenant. Prior to the application being presented to city council, the applicant reaches an agreement with the existing nonprofit to lease space in the new building.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. So we see in this one a lot more potential impact. We see that it's in a neighborhood that is already at high risk for displacement. We see an RNO who appears to be more actively engaged potentially than we've talked about. And underlying this, it is really getting to this question of, in particular neighborhoods, should we have, or for particular types of requests, should we have a different kind of input and response? Should it be the same in all? So Rob, let's go ahead and take down that slide and think about this question that we have talked about before. And, you know, Councilwoman Sitabaca and some of you have thought about, you know, weighted voting, but in addition to that, should there be different outreach, that sort of thing based on the impact and the area? So Joel?
You know, first, let me just add my assumptions here. I assume that the zoning they're going for is consistent with adopted plans. So we're not talking about really, are they proposing doing something that's inconsistent with the direction the city has set? It's really a question of the outreach and the tenant.
That's our focus today, Joel. So you can't assume that both of these were within those same guidelines and met the. Yeah.
Right. And by saying that, but by teeing that up, the reason why I'm doing so is I don't think this lends itself to a discussion about who should vote and how heavily their input should be weighed, because at the end of the day, what they're proposing in terms of what the zoning should be on the land is, I'm assuming, consistent with adopted plans. The real issue here was outreach, because clearly there could have been and should have been a conversation, and when there was at the last minute in this hypothetical scenario, something good happened, but they could have and should have had that conversation earlier. So one of the things that we've talked about many times on these meetings was notifications of rezonings that have been applied for need to go out to everyone in the immediate vicinity, not just property owners in the immediate vicinity. And I recall saying on a previous meeting, I was surprised and disappointed to hear that the current notifications that are going out, which it hasn't been the process for that long, are only going to property owners and not tenants. So if we fix that, I think cases like this, where the conversation that should be had that doesn't necessarily involve the city, it's a conversation between a tenant and their landlord, but the landlord failed to initiate, will be initiated because the notice went out months before when it happened in this scenario.
So we're putting an exclamation point on the recommendations from the last meeting to ensure that everyone gets noticed. And then you are raising a question for the group about whether or not people agree with you, that as long as it's within the plan and the criteria, you're thinking no other changes should. Kate?
The developer met with the RNO and negotiated a whole slew of things, but the RNO isn't necessarily the neighborhood. So it does seem inequitable. It's whoever has the time and the interest to be on the RNO that in this case, controls the outcome of how that property might be operated. And yeah, it seems like an odd circumstance that they're not checking with everybody else in the neighborhood.
So continued concerns about the RNO, and Councilwoman Gilmore, and then Lou.
Thank you. You know, especially in this example, nonprofits that serve the community, the Office of Children's Affairs has a really comprehensive list of nonprofits by geographic area in the city. And so those nonprofits should also be alerted and asked that they share the information out with their networks, schools that are in the area as well, because a lot of parents, you know, you get your Friday folder or whatever correspondence, but it makes sense because any new or differing uses of the land will impact parents picking up, dropping off children, affect the use of a school in the area. And so high-level nonprofits and schools and asking them, or I don't think we could require it, but if a nonprofit has a contract with the city and county of Denver, it doesn't seem like that's too heavy of a lift or a reminder as a requirement that the city might ask them to share some upcoming rezoning information to get more community members involved. Thanks.
Thanks, Councilwoman Gilmore. So again, an explanation point on some of what we talked about last week, but last month, it really comes home here about how do we get noticing to nonprofits and schools. And then if they weighed in, would you have any weighting in the criteria or in any of that, or okay?
No, I don't. The weighting, it sounds good, but I mean, at the end of the day, when city council votes on a rezoning, if it has met the criteria that has gone through CPD, through the planning board, and then through council, it can be legally challenged. If for whatever reason, just because council doesn't like it, that's not a good legal reason. There has to be specific criteria as to why we're voting against a rezoning. And so I think that would have to be weighed, or we need to relook at the criteria, but I'm not in favor of any sort of weighting.
Thank you, Lou, and then Councilwoman Sita Baca.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit when Joel made an assumption about consistency with plans. There's also an assumption that I think I make that clearly is not in everyone's experience true, and that is that an RNO that is active, they don't just make decisions at a board level, that they do take information back to residents, that they provide a platform for notifying residents and businesses within the area, that there's not a paid member only voting, because what we try to do is educate everybody, post a lot of information and let people weigh in. And when there are approved plans, and when we do our agreements, sometimes it's because the zoning isn't necessarily consistent with all of those plans. So I acknowledge that that some RNOs may not function that way, but that's where this process for this task force merges a little bit with the ongoing efforts that City Council has had to redo RNO, to really do RNO reform. And so you have to make an assumption that that process is consistent also in a way that strengthens RNO's ability to reach people and do the work that they're supposed to do.
So once again, I think what we're hearing is, Liz, we hope that the CPD team is really conveying to the RNO work group how critical we continue to see this play out in inequitable situations for our communities. So Liz, do we have anything that we can tell folks yet about where, or is anybody on this group also on the RNO group who's looking at RNOs? Is anybody also on that group? Councilwoman Sita Baca, can you give us any update on how that's going with the RNO reforms? I use the word reform and maybe that's not the right word.
Very slowly. It's not moving very quickly, so there's not a lot of movement there. So all of these ideas are good to take back to it.
Great. Well, you're getting to hear it today, so you can put an explanation point from this group as well on concerns about RNOs. And we've heard in some of our community meetings even requests from RNO leaders saying we don't have the capacity we need to do this and do it well. So Councilwoman Sita Baca and then Bruce.
Yes, just so you guys know, the concerns brought up about the RNOs, it's all consistent. It's all exactly the reason that that effort is going. But my question, and maybe this is something you can take back to the administration, Rox, but my question is, how do we access the systems that allow us to send emergency alerts via text or weather alerts or Amber alerts? Because I think that with the advancement of technology, mailing somebody a postcard isn't necessarily going to get to renter, owner, resident, whatever it is, the way we would like it to. And in the absence of a centralized platform for all city interfacing, we've got to figure out a more modern approach to notifying people. And I think that if there are not federal regulations around how we utilize those emergency notification systems, there are ways I think that you can geographically isolate an area that you want to communicate to. And so we should be looking into that kind of notification as well.
Great. I know there are some restrictions around that, so we will take it back to the team to look at it. And actually, Councilwoman Sandoval also, and they've done some exploration, and it's not legal. I think that's federally that there's the problem. I know there's been efforts on that, but at our last meeting on noticing, people did have a number of ideas and ways to help get out the word via text, that sort of thing. So we'll keep drilling down because it's got to get modernized.
Yeah, and definitely promoting a single platform for us to do all of the things that we interface with the city for, because then everybody, whether you're signed up for public benefits, any kind of rental assistance, if you have a parking permit, whatever it is, you would have the equivalent of PocketGov with more functions, where you're not just passively engaging with the city, but the city can push notifications directly to you. And there's an incentive for you to be signed up on it.
Great. I think we've got Bruce, Flor, and then Anna. So Bruce, who is not really Yvonne, but he pretending to be today.
I pretended that on an earlier meeting as well.
I did.
I'm curious, I see a lot of disparity in R&O, how R&Os are run and managed, and governance, and how engaged people are, and how sophisticated the R&Os are with regard to land use. And they're all volunteer people, trying to do the best for their community. Is there some thinking in R&O reform of making requirements of R&Os to behave in certain ways? I'm confused, or I guess I'm curious, I should say, about what requirements could be imposed on R&Os to make them more efficient or more informative to their neighborhood and that type of thing. And I was unaware that there was reform being discussed.
So Bruce, we've talked about this a couple of times before. There is a committee in the city that's working on it, and to flip the side of that, we've also heard from the R&O's leadership that they'd like resources to do that. So I think all of that is what is underway in Councilman Cashman's committee that Councilwoman Cedarbach is saying is going slow. Am I understanding that correctly? So it's in process, but I don't think we have any results yet or recommendations, is there?
Correct. And if you have ideas of what he should be considering, definitely send them his way. A model that I have looked into and promoted is the Empower LA model, which requires R&Os to get certified that they are representative of the neighborhoods that they're in order to get technical assistance dollars and recognition from the city to do the R&O functions. And then there are neighborhood councils that they fold up into. So Empower LA, I'll put a link in the chat for you to check out, and other ideas are welcome as well.
So, and I'm going to ask us as we come back to comments to stay in the universe that we can control right now. So we know that work is happening. We know it's going slowly, but we would hate for them to say that we haven't done our work on noticing. So let's come back to really thinking about noticing as well. So I've got Flora, Anna, then Councilwoman Sandoval.
So one thing about this scenario that stood out back to what someone had previously said about them reaching out to the RNO is them not necessarily reaching out, from what I understand, to the nonprofit that's in the building. So when it comes to requiring notice, you would think that people would be required to notice people that are in the building that they are affecting. And I don't know if that's the case, but who are they required to notice? And also, you know, echoing other comments is that I think it only makes sense at least to make some kind of physical connection and knock on, like, why not knock on the next door neighbor's door and let them know what's going on instead of just mailing a postcard.
Yeah, and so you're suggesting that we take beyond noticing that we talked about last time, that there's also engagement that needs to occur at that point. So it's
right,
not just
especially with the people, like in this, in trying to stick to this specific example, like this person is in this building, you know, you think they would be the first people you would talk to.
Yep. So it's not just a paper notice, it's engagement. All right, Anna and then Councilwoman Sandoval, how else might we think about this engagement and community input process?
I really just wanted to add an exclamation point, as you have said, to Councilwoman Gilmore's comment of, and I know we discussed this before, but I really think if we were to notify students in our schools to bring, you know, be it through the DPS communication or be it through a flyer or whatever, that's a whole group of people who are constantly overlooked. Being a teacher at North for so long, you would think that most of those students were from the North side, but a lot of them lived in far, far away, had a connection to that part of town and therefore came. So you're getting students involved politically who, right, that are often excluded, parents who don't have time to go to these things. And so I truly think we would be overcoming a lot of these equitable issues if we're reaching out to students in our school. I love also the idea of requiring outreach to a nonprofit in that area to also do their help in getting the word out.
So I think what you are saying here, and Joel Scott, I'm going to ask people again to bring your comments back to the group and rather than just in chat, but I'll capture them real quick for you, Joel. Is that noticing needs to be broader to include outreach and engagement. So a notice alone, particularly to a tenant, isn't sufficient. It's about how do we outreach, how do we engage as well. Councilwoman Sandoval.
Thank you. So I just agree with the comments of that the tenant should have been notified, and I don't necessarily know if it should be. I think that could easily be made on the application. So when you're doing a pre-application, you can actually put one of the pre-application requirements when you're doing an application, have you contacted the council person? And then verify it. So if it's a commercial building, have you notified your tenants? So then that doesn't happen. This doesn't happen throughout the process. And when a sign goes up, that actually CPD is doing due diligence of that rezoning process and the tenants who are in there. Because a lot of times I feel like we put the onus on the community and we put the onus on the tenants and we put the onus on everybody else. But maybe that should just be something that CPD could add to the application to say, have you done it? And then actually have a way to trust and then verify it. Thank you.
Great. So being really careful as we do this of who's responsible and the documentation behind it as well. Caitlin, and then I'm going to ask if we've had a number of people who haven't had a chance to speak up yet. For those of you who've been quiet, or if you have anything you really like or you want to disagree with, and then we'll see if there's other comments. So Caitlin?
Yeah, I was actually just going to tag on to Councilwoman Sandoval. The CPD did recently update the rezoning application to ask, you know, what has your engagement been? Have you met with the council person? But it sort of seems more like, tell us if you have, right? And I think it could be pretty easily shifted to, you know, tell us the date and a requirement that they've met with the council person and engaged with the neighborhood in a different way and more expressly ahead of application for the rezoning. So I think it's there. It just could be tweaked slightly, and I think it could accomplish exactly what Councilwoman Sandoval was raising.
Great. So just want to take a second before we give people who've been speaking more another chance to speak, and see if for folks like Robin or Lindsay, if some of you have been quiet, or if you want to emphasize anything or disagree with anything. And if not, that's fine. I just want to always make a chance for the extroverts to breathe for a minute and let some folks, other folks chime in if they need to or would like to.
Mostly just been absorbing and processing, so I'll have thoughts to share later, I'm sure.
Okay, that goes really well with the sign behind you, Robin. If you can't see, it says where to next. So you're thinking about it. So thanks. Anybody else? Okay, Joel.
Yeah, I just I wanted to say that I think it would be very reasonable to have a requirement to attest to outreach to the tenants of the property and the property owners, if it's different than the applicant, of the land actually being proposed to be rezoned, right? You can encourage meeting with a neighborhood group or other groups, and you can improve resources for how to reach them. There may or may not be an active group that's registered on the RNO list, et cetera, but it's hard to imagine a case where somebody shouldn't, if they've gone to the formal step of applying to rezone, they haven't told the people who reside on the land or own a business on the land being rezoned.
Great. Thank you. So really adding to that requirement that it's just not a checkoff box, but there's some additional documentation, attestation, that sort of thing. In the chat, there's concerns about not putting the burden on schools. So we want to be careful about, if we're asking other people to help, that they have the resources and the ability to do that and are thinking about that carefully. Any other comments? Okay. CPD staff, is there anything else you would like to have for input from this group today, or that you're thinking about where you'd like them to go a little deeper?
Thanks, Rox. This is a great discussion with good ideas for us to think about. One thing I think would be helpful, because we've had this theme come up about maybe it's not the same for all applications, again, about whether that's the neighborhood, the impact, the applicant. And if there's thoughts about if you would treat these two differently in terms of that, if we were to go so far as an engagement requirement or something like that, would you, would you suggest that we look into different levels of that, depending on what it is? If it's a smaller property owner who's doing an ADU rezoning or something, another type of small one that we could get to defining, and the value for the neighborhood too, or whoever we're trying to get to participate too, if there's like how you would think about that scaling, or just the difference that may be between different types of applications would be helpful.
Yes, I'd love to hear some yeses and nos of it should be different, or no, it shouldn't be different. And I'm seeing some responses in chat. Can you hold on for a second and we'll bring them into the group? So let's go to Lou, and then Caitlin, and then Anna, and then Joel.
Yeah, so I just want to, bring us back to an early discussion we had about the equity, which is the more that we put burdens of notice on nest communities, smaller communities, people that maybe want to rezone and don't have a lot of money, then we have to be cognizant that while we're trying to get the notices out, we don't want to inadvertently, step into a place where we make it harder for nest communities and people really trying to do a rezoning in their community, to make it more difficult. And that's where, if we do have more, burdens, maybe we can size those so that it's easier on those communities.
Great. So being aware of the resources there. Caitlin, and then Anna, and then Joel. So Caitlin, I know you put it in chat, but I just want to bring it back to the group.
Yeah, just responding to Liz's question. Yes, I agree that they should be scaled.
And do you have a preference that it's based on whether it's a nest neighborhood or the size of the project, or yes, we need to think through all of that?
Yeah, I think it's probably both, but I think the size of the project could often be an indicator.
And would you also have a criteria about more outreach or more engagement if it's in a neighborhood that's already been identified as at risk of displacement?
Yeah, I think kind of more variety of how that outreach is done, but I think I'd love to hear from the rest of the group on that front. But I think, yeah.
Okay, so based on size and potentially on the neighborhood as well. I'm sorry, that's my list. Anna and then Joel.
Sorry, I was just responding in the chat to the question about not wanting to put the burden on the schools, which I really appreciate because there's already too much burden there anyway. And the thought is to leave that to the applicant to perhaps leave some sort of flyer there that could be handed out. And even more simply, just one sign at the front of the school, much like that's put at a site. And I also really appreciate, I think Lou, I forgot who said it, I'm sorry, about just keeping being this an equitable conversation about when we make more regulation around rezonings, we could also be hurting a rezoning that could benefit, like an affordable housing rezoning, for example. So that's actually been a fear of mine with a lot of these asks, changes. So I don't have the best ideas on how to overcome that. I think personally, if it's in a rich neighborhood that has seen a lot fewer rezonings, there should be the pathway should be much easier to get to that rezoning, my personal opinion.
Great, thank you. Joel and then Councilwoman Gilmore.
I'll bring up something that I hadn't brought up in a while, and it's less about differing notification requirements based on the economics of the neighborhood it's in, or the particular zone intensity of the zone district being applied for. I'm not sure really what I think about those. I think the process should be the same everywhere, and it should be a good process. But Blueprint Denver calls on us to look at legislative rezonings after we do an area plan, and in areas where displacement is a concern and other equity indicators are concerned, to bake into a legislative kind of an area-wide process the use of tools to help with displacement or consider these factors. And those tools make a lot more sense when you're talking about an area, rather than getting into a debate of, will a building on this corner cause displacement over there, which gets pretty weird and hypothetical to talk about. So I just want to put in another plug for, especially in nest neighborhoods, but I think it should be the standard city practice. You've convened everybody for a couple of years to do a neighborhood plan. After that is approved and adopted, then kind of rolling into a community involved process for a legislative rezoning for everywhere that makes sense in the area, and including anti-displacement tools and other ideas. Lindsay and I had a conversation some months ago, and she had some ideas what those tools might be. But in that context of a legislative rezoning, that the CPD does a really good job of convening a diverse community together and getting the notice out for neighborhood plans, and kind of building on that and rolling into it. Because if a successful rezoning, fundamentally what it's doing is changing the land use regulations to match our community plans, right? It's doing what we called for. Then I think we should have the community together all the way through rezoning an area as much as possible, to get out of the way of people being able to do the things we called for. So it's been a while since I brought that up, but I really like that to be Denver's standard practice. I know it is in some of our peer cities.
Great, thanks, Joel. And it sounds like we already have some of the tools that we could use and use successfully. Councilwoman Gilmore, I'm going to let you have the last comment on this section.
Well, thank you. And I, again, also appreciate the comment, but the onus always is on the property owner who is wanting to rezone. So there wouldn't be a requirement of the schools to do anything. The property owner always has to do that outreach. So whatever the mechanism is, it makes sense that they would be doing that work. I think we also are missing an opportunity to look at our local libraries and city-owned facilities as areas for people to get more information. We have a lot of people that come to Denver Human Services, which is in the Ari P. Taylor building in the Montbello community. And while they're waiting for services or just seeing some sort of information, getting information about changes to the community, rezonings, et cetera, would be another added place for people to get information. Thanks.
Great. I mean, I think part of what we're hearing in both of these last two recommendations is use the tools we have, use the locations we have, and maximize both our community outreach that has worked and our noticing where we could do more. Joel, is your hand raised? Okay, you really, this is your last comment. We're gonna make, and then we have to move on. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, my last comment was very big. This comment is very small. If I understand correctly, the first time an applicant is given one of those big yellow signs to post is not after they've applied for the rezoning, but much later when a public hearing has been set. And I know that comes from a, hear ye, a public hearing is being held on this date, and it's, 4 weeks ahead of that or something. But how much of this could we just solve for the tenants, for a lot of people, if we just required that after a rezoning is officially applied for and considered a complete application, that then they post it, right? I'm not saying we back off on doing postcards in the area or back off on what we're doing now, but so many of these examples of, does somebody know about it in enough time to talk to their landlord and et cetera, et cetera. Boy, that's simple, that's cheap, we should be doing that.
So great. In addition to what we talked about last time at our noticing and the languages and that sort of thing, simply get it out there earlier. Okay, good. Wow, we got through a lot today. And I think what is great is we are really emphasizing some of the things that we have talked about before and also foreshadowing some of the things that are coming in terms of criteria, that sort of thing. And so we had hoped that some of this work would start to be a bit iterative, that yes, we're starting to distill some of these ideas and increase the equity and work through that. So on that note, as Liz mentioned at the start, Yvonne talked to us about scheduling.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Great. Everybody's breaking up for me, but my internet isn't stable.
Yvonne, I can do it if you need me to. Okay. So can you raise your hand if you cannot, if September 14th from 3 to 5, September 14th from 3 to 5 p.m. would not work for you as an additional meeting? Can you raise your hand? Okay. Bruce, we will figure out a way to get you updated. Okay. But see, we only have one objection. Yvonne's going to move forward with putting that on everyone's calendar. Same thing, December the 14th. Again, as a reminder, Hanukkah doesn't start until the 18th. Can everybody add December 14th before we go into holidays? Anybody who cannot make December the 14th, could you please raise your hand? Thank you. Brandon, I think this group is really committed to helping you get there with what you need and continuing to support you, Liz and Rob, with the team. We will be sending out notices then to add the September 14th and December 14th dates. They're both Wednesdays, so both be 3 to 5 p.m. and Yvonne will get a couple of days. And we do have 2 people who are in attendance. And so for the second person who is signed in is Councilwoman and for Shakita, do you either of you have any comments? Okay, not seeing any there. We go back to the task force, and Fleur, I see your
Yes,
hand
just
raised.
reflecting on the last comments about also thinking about equity for somebody that's applying for a permit or applying for a zoning change. I think that the scenarios leave that out. You know, is this an underserved person applying for a zoning change? Or is it, you know, a developer? Is it affordable housing? Or is it, you know, the ADU one, you know, makes me think maybe it's an underserved person that can't afford to buy another house, so their grandma has to move in, so they need that, you know, because if we're talking about equity, I think a little more context in the scenarios would be helpful.
Great. So as we think about these recommendations, are there different outreach supports or requirements based on the applicant and their resources? Lou.
Just one final point, that I know most of you know that the affordable housing legislation has passed. And what that means is every single new development, single family home, exception of additions, I think less than 400 square feet. And of course, larger buildings have more affordable housing requirements. So if you read that legislation, it is pretty clear that rezonings that seek to be larger buildings will pay more if they don't include the affordable housing in them. So I just want to remind everybody that that landscape for affordable housing has changed substantially since we started this project because that legislation has passed.
Great. Thank you, Lou. We'll go to Councilwoman Sita Baca, and then Joel, I'm not certain your comment in chat where it relates, so I'm going to come back to you and ask you to verbally to do that. Okay. So Councilwoman Sita Baca.
Thank you. Just to highlight to Joel's earlier point about wanting to kind of get out of the way of what city plans have said we should be doing. I just want to remind us that often the people who participated in neighborhoods in those city planning processes or neighborhood planning processes are the same RNOs that we're saying have too much weight and too much voice in this other end of it. And so just to keep that in mind when we're talking about getting out of the way of what the city has said we should be doing, just remember who influenced that.
Great. Joel, and then Councilwoman Sandoval.
Yeah, thank you. Someone just a minute ago was talking about a hardship situation where the person who's applying for the rezoning, it's difficult. They're not familiar with the process. They aren't attorneys. They don't have a lot of money to pay for the application fee, et cetera. It's been quite a number of meetings since we talked about this, but great time to bring it up again. I could totally see a path where a proposed rezoning that clearly meets the plan support criteria and where there's sort of a hardship, you know, it would be very difficult for someone to apply and navigate what is a legal process and pay fees. The city could just be the applicant.
Great. So really considering a process for applying for hardship, city being the applicant, but waiving those fees. Great. Thank you. Councilwoman Sandoval.
Yeah, thank you. So as a representative who's going through a neighborhood planning initiative, I don't really have RNOs at the table. So I don't think that we can use general terms like that to say that all RNOs are the ones who need to get out of the way, because in Northwest Denver, in the 4 neighborhoods, we don't have RNOs. We have community representatives, and we actually have one of the most diverse committees. So I just want to be careful when we're using terminology like that, because one of the things that we are looking at in Northwest Denver through that planning initiative is to do accessory dwelling units in areas like Sunnyside that don't have them, and do overlays in areas that don't have them. And that is all coming from community members and feedback and charrettes that we've done. And one thing that I don't know where to add this thought to, I think it was probably a couple meetings ago, but one thing is I sat in a mock city council hearing in Glendale, and what I learned is that the city and county of Denver is the only municipality that doesn't allow an applicant to speak during the public hearing. And I thought that was fascinating that I had heard from probably 6 or 7 different city council members or land use commissioners that during their public hearing at the very beginning, the city presents their application, and then the applicant gets to go and talk about their what their project is and give a little bit more insight. And I feel like at city council, that's oftentimes the questioning that we do at the very end, is we call up the owner and we start asking them about their project, or we start asking about their tenant. And if we could build that into our process, maybe that would clear up some of the issues that we're seeing with equity and being able to ask those questions. And it seems like it's a best practice throughout the state. So it'd be something that just wanted to make that suggestion, but I just didn't know exactly where in that process it would fit in. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We've got both of those, both in terms of the awareness of the difference in RNOs and whether or not they even exist or are useful in some neighborhoods or utilized. And then secondly, when and how do the applicants get to speak themselves? Okay. Robin, you also added some thoughts in chat about, as we think about nonprofits and outreach, thinking about places like Mile High United Way and community shares. Great thoughts. Anything you want to add to that?
I was just thinking that, in addition to nonprofits that have city contracts, those are 2 organizations that have a lot of community connections and are invested in supporting and pulling community organizations into the mix. So there just might be some good partnership opportunities there in the future.
Yeah, that whole piece about outreach and how and where we do it. Okay, I'm going to go to Bruce for a final comment.
Oh, real quick, I just agree with Amanda. Denver's an outlier in not allowing applicants to make much of a presentation. And I think it would be an improvement to the process to open that up and have it be like everywhere else. And because I'm last, I won't belabor that any longer. Thank you.
Good thinking, you all. I think we've had some really good conversation today, and we wanted to take a couple of minutes and check in with you all. Did it help today to have a couple of scenarios? Was that helpful for you all in terms of our thinking? Liz, I'm seeing some head nods on this. So Liz, thank you and your team for getting them done and for getting them out in advance. And any other feedback for us in terms of the meeting today?
I did enjoy the scenarios. Even if they're not necessarily, who knows how often the scenarios happen, it just gets us talking a little bit. And so good job in getting us talking more. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz and team on that. Joel?
Yeah, I think scenarios are always excellent. As we start coming up with the package of recommendations, I think it'd be great to go back not only to these scenarios, but for the ones this whole effort kicked off with. I think we divided it into subgroups, and had 3 scenarios that have been thoughtfully developed. It'd be great to just test our recommendations against those scenarios and others.
Great idea, Joel. As we get to the end, that'll be really helpful. We laid these out, and does it really make a difference? Steve?
Just real quick, the scenarios reminded me of how much these same equity issues come up in so many other cases than just in rezonings. And it feels, I know it's a required way to take this on, but it feels so artificial to look at just rezonings when there are so many other times, like a tenant can be displaced for lots of reasons. And it can be inequitable. And maybe there should be a broader effort at addressing inequity than just divided into little tiny pieces like this.
Thanks, Steve. Any other thoughts from the group? Liz, I'm going to turn it to you for any closing thoughts. And would you like Rob to show this, the
If he
last
doesn't
slide?
mind, you can pull that up. I think it's just a reminder of our next meeting date, which I think is August 24th. And we'll go ahead and send out those additional dates that we just discussed today. And just thank you all for your patience as we work through these, but I think it's good to talk through each of these topics, and we'll layer them together as we come up with our recommendations. And we'll certainly take the feedback of doing more of these scenarios and case studies, and looking at bringing back some of the peer city research from these ideas that we're hearing as we move forward. But thank you all.
Thank you all very much. At this point, we will stop record, and thank you all for being here.